Hello, everyone, and welcome to the second in a week-long series of talks around But Still It Turns, curator Paul Graham's Revitalising Manifesto for Photography of the World as It Is. So over 4 days, a series of artists and writers will be discussing the book's themes and provocations around the issues of time, place, process, and sequence. My name's Liv Constable-Maxwell and I work at Mac, and today I'm thrilled to introduce RaMell Ross and Curran Hatleberg for a discussion around the theme of place. So RaMell Ross is a visual artist, filmmaker, writer and liberated documentarian. His works appeared across the globe, including but not limited to Aperture, Hammer Museum, Institute of Contemporary Arts London, Museum of Modern Art, National Gallery of Art and Walcott Art Centre. He's recipient of numerous grants and awards, and his feature experimental documentary, Hale County, This Morning, This Evening, has won a special jury award for creative vision at the 2018 Sundance Film Festival and the 2020 Peabody Award. And it was nominated for both an Oscar at the Academy Awards and also an Emmy for exceptional merit in documentary film. And Curran Hatleberg, who we've got with us as well, received some MFA from Yale University in 2010. His work's been exhibited nationally and internationally, including recent shows at the Whitney Museum of American Art, Massachusetts MoCA, Higher Pictures and Frankel Gallery. He's taught photography at numerous institutions, including Yale University and Cooper Union, and is the recipient of numerous prestigious grants and awards. Lost Coast, his first monograph, was released by TBW Books in fall 2016. Somewhere Someone, a collaborative artist book with Cynthia Heinolt, was released by Hassler Books in fall 2017, and his forthcoming second monograph, Peanut Stream, will be published by TBW Books. So, hello, RaMell. Hey, Curran. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us. I will say, because I thought about, like, if I had 1 second to, if I feel like I would say this probably without some sort of unsolicited, and it'd be really awkward otherwise. So I'll say it now. But Curran, I really love your work, and you I feel like I was like trying to think of a tagline for you, and the thing I came up with was the last real photographer. But that's like kind of like ridiculous. But like the last, so much better in my head because there was like bright lights and like like a mic, but. Yeah.
I can't tell you how much I appreciate that. It's coming from you. I mean, I was gonna say something similar once we kicked off, which is just, yeah, I'm a big fan, without question. As soon as I saw Hale County the first time, it sort of burned itself into my mind. So it's something that I carry with me, when I'm out there working, and it's needless to say, it's powerful. It's incredible.
Thank you. Yeah, I definitely think you're at the American road tradition photography, but you're like the most recent last real one, and that's not fair for everyone else that does it because their work is great and amazing. But yeah, you're definitely bringing something completely fresh as it relates to composition, which is almost impossible these days. It's like literally almost impossible. Yeah.
The last thing I'll say is having a kid this last year, there's a scene in your movie that I always kind of like return to, which is there's a moment where it's the young boy, the child is like kind of bathing himself in the tub, and he's covered in soap, and he starts glancing down at his hand, and the moon just appears in his palm, and it's like one of the most, I don't know, moving moments in the film for me. And it just, being a father, I don't know, it's a new emotional territory. So it just clicks in so beautifully with what I've been thinking about recently. But yeah, just that kind of like, you kind of accessed that childlike imagination in that scene in particular, where the moon, I think it's a moon, right? It just like appears and it's you believe it, in the moment.
Thanks. That's I think that might be one of my favorite parts too. And no one has mentioned that as something that was, stand out to them. So yeah, I appreciate that. There's like such a big risk, right? When you're, especially in cinema, like you're the tropes of crossfading and you know, double exposure, like they're all out there already. So it's like, what do you all think about this? You know, it's but yeah, I definitely appreciate that, Curran.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
So we're here to talk about both your work in relation to Still It Turns, which we have here, and in relation to place, specifically with, there's a kind of short lead quote that we have to root us the conversation, to springboard us away. So I'll read the short quote out and then we can kind of begin. So the quote goes like this. It's by poet W.S. Graham. "Somewhere our belonging particles believe in us, if only we could find them." So, I mean, maybe the best place to begin would be to talk about place and the respective places that you've both worked, and about the process of arriving there, and what was that like for both of you, and how did you come to be in these places?
Well, in relation to the work in the show and in the book, I sort of arrived in Eureka, California, because of a teaching opportunity. So I was teaching at the College of the Redwoods, which is a local community college there, and it was a really generous opportunity to kind of dig into place and sort of try to see it from a more embedded stance than I'd typically done in the past. Prior to being sort of planted there for teaching and making my work, I had traveled extensively around the country and was a little bit more rootless in my approach to place. So being in Humboldt and in Eureka particularly was sort of this fresh thing for me. And it really allowed me to focus in and sort of develop richer, more long-lasting sort of relationships within that place, which turned out to be an incredible gift. So the pictures all result from those sort of collaborative, shared experiences with the residents of Eureka that I got to know over that year that I was there. So yeah, that was sort of how that came about.
What about you, RaMell?
Yeah, so I photograph exclusively in Hale County, Alabama. And the name of the photo series or the photo project in the show is called South County, Alabama, but that's a fictional title for a place. It's, you know, it's sort of referencing the South of consciousness, South of collective consciousness. And, you know, for me, at least, that's the place where most places actually exist. And so, yeah, I also went there for an opportunity, like Curran did, and I was teaching a photography course for 3 weeks back in 2009, and a job opportunity opened up in this organization called Youth Build, and I was like really struggling in DC, freelancing and trying to, you know, support myself in a really expensive place, and so I decided to take the job or apply for the job. I got the job and then move. And that's kind of where, once I moved there, is where it really opened up. Kind of very similar to Curran, you know, you're there and then all of a sudden the third week, something looks different, although everything's the same. And then the 8th week, the same thing happens. And then you realize, which is something we all know intuitively, but it's way more difficult to apprehend when you're sort of out in the real world and places have all of these really romantic structures and light coming through places, that the longer you're in a place, the more you can actually see it. And you can kind of see through, in a way, some of those really poignant initial landmarks of beauty. And then you can kind of incorporate them in more interesting ways into the way you see the world. So yeah, it became a kind of conceptual approach and almost a political act for me, at least, to go to this place and then to never leave, and then allow for, over time, I've been there like 12 years now, 11 years now, to see what continually manifests itself from what I already know very well.
So I guess that's kind of interesting in terms of, Curran, what you were saying, you know, about sort of arriving somewhere, and with a lot of your work being about kind of being an outsider coming into these new communities, or, you know, a lot of your work is sort of about travel, you know, and I'd be interested to hear how you kind of navigate those roles of kind of arriving into these places as someone new, and then, you know, kind of RaMell as well, how that was like, you know, 12 years later, how your photographs had changed, having gone from being, you know, someone new in this community to then being kind of embedded in it, to use Curran's word.
I feel like there's an incredible gift and opportunity that comes with being an outsider in a new place. When you're a fish out of water, you don't have your roots in place. You don't have your family and community and loved ones. You're sort of detached from all of those comforts. And so when I find myself in a place that those things don't exist, I very quickly and organically set out trying to find them. So it creates a kind of path, an opportunity to establish contact, to create shared experience, to make connection, because it's something, you know, it's an essential part of who we are as people, I think, is to try to access each other, you know, try to learn something from each other. And so when you're new somewhere and you don't know anyone, there's this kind of like boundless opportunity to create contact, and seeing it through like this kind of newness, and almost it's almost like exotic, like it's so seductive and exciting to reach out to people. And so I just kind of lead with that as a instructive guide, I guess, and sort of create contact that way.
Yeah, that's a really beautiful way of being an outsider, Curran. You know, I really, the cynic in me really wishes that most people approach outsiderness with the thoughtfulness and the sort of true human vulnerability that you do. Yeah, I personally, when I went to Hale County, it took me a long time to make images that I was satisfied with, because of the problem of pre-existing visualities. You know, like we go to a place and, you know, Curran, you're, you know, a well-learned photographer, and your photography, at least from my vantage point, is like very avant-garde in the tradition, you know, in terms of the way in which you're producing things. And so like we kind of have seen so many images, right? And more images, I think, in different types of images than those who are just sort of scrolling on Instagram or on whatever internet thing, because we also do that. So we're composing those too. And I think the challenge for me as an outsider, insider, which is always like a really fraught language, because I've been there for what, 12 years, and I'm not an insider. You know, I'll never be an insider, you know. And to some degree, everyone's an outsider, you know, in their family, if they're a certain way, or they're an insider in certain ways. And so the terms get really muddy. For me, it took a long time to get through those images that we naturally produce, and try to find something that feels like it's contributing something slightly different, and not necessarily new, but something that is part of the world of images, but something that doesn't exactly reproduce it. You know, and then, you know, race and class and power and all of these things, you know, begin to come in the more that you know, the more that you read. And it becomes such a difficult terrain to live in as a person that's not from the place. Like, you're just kind of always the person from away. Although finding the family, like you said, I think is the best avenue to being accepted, you know, and to being happy with where you are.
It's interesting, the longer you spend with somebody, I've never even close to touched the 12 years of investment and love that you've put into Alabama, but you know, there are certain families, for example, that I'll return to every year to see and spend time with, and the relationship gets so much deeper and richer and ultimately a lot more complicated. Like, so that you start to bring baggage into the equation that maybe you didn't at the beginning. But I think when you work through that, you know, and sort of figure out how to rest in that kind of uncertainty and awkwardness at times, that comes through intimacy, the work's the better for it by the end. But it can be a real struggle, to say the least. Yeah.
Well, this is what I was going to ask in terms of, you know, coming to a new place and depending so much on, you know, the generosity of other people and kindness in order to make, you know, forge these families. And I wondered how much you felt that kind of gratitude informs the way that you make photographs when you're new somewhere, or if that kind of plays into it.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's almost crushing, you know, like the gratitude and gift that someone gives, you know, to allow access to their very personal life. You know, it's I feel undeserving most of the time, you know, like to be included, to have a seat at literally at the table, you know, like to be fed meals or to be invited to stay over, whatever the depth of the relationship. It's such a, I'm still startled by it, you know, the people's generosity in the photographic process, and even beyond that, you know, just kind of like what RaMell said earlier, just the vulnerability that people can display, you know, it's incredible, and not lost on me. So, you know, it's like, what do you do with that? You try to make it a two-way street, you know, you try to do all you can to honor them and care for them, and make sure that it turns out right, you know.
How much RaMell, do you feel that when you're kind of photographing people, how much of a sort of collaboration do you make it, or, you know, how do you, on a sort of practical level, how do you work with people when you're kind of making their portraits, because they're obviously so intimate and kind of magical and captivating, and yeah, I'd kind of be interested to hear more.
Well, the process kind of varies for it. You know, I'm using I used to use a 4x10, 4x5. Now I'm using 8x10, and it's all sort of slide film. So it's just like really, there's just not much leniency for error. So everything's very slow, but everything's very almost like painfully and incrementally kind of thoughtful, but also impulsive, and also sort of whimsical, but very controlled, you know? And basically the process is just full of contradictions. And the aim is just to sort of produce a moment that didn't exist otherwise, which is obvious, and wouldn't exist without the sort of, you know, inner subjective back and forth that's happening between me and the person who I'm photographing. But also produce something that like just doesn't have, like, that is a little bit unsettling, that it's a little bit mysterious, but also like very open and very practical. And something that I feel like I like to make images where people think, or they almost feel as if they stumbled upon a scene, you know, like if they were there, they could see that. But I like to embed in the composition, like, and in the gestures of the person who's being photographed, my very personal understanding of them. Most of those folks I photographed were my students. And so I know them well. I know their quirks. I know, you know, the way that they, you know, dismiss and the way that they accept. And so I'm like, oh, when I think of Dakisha, like I think of her as this. And so I try to formulate something like that, and then allow something random to happen simultaneously to just like produce this super idiosyncratic but solid sense of meaning for myself. which to me ensures that no one will ever understand that that's the purpose of the photograph, and then provides a sort of infinite imaginative terrain for them. But yeah, I want to kind of just jump onto what Curran said about gratitude. Yeah, I connect with that a lot, because it is about giving as much as it is receiving, you know, and just trying to actually and genuinely be there, right? I think that's what most people prefer or want, is just that, like, when they're hanging out with someone, that they're hanging out with them, you know, and, you know, we're ourselves, and we're, you know, yeah, like, we're their friends, you know, like a genuine friend. And I think when you have, and then that sort of transcends the insider outsider, you know, like, you can meet someone. My old partner used to say, and obviously it can be debated, but it's a beautiful idea, and that, like, the people you meet most recently know you the best, because you're the person. They don't bring the baggage of your childhood, or what you were like in high school, or what you said that one time. You know, they're allowed to see you for whatever person you are in that moment. And yeah, and when you can do those things with people and share moments, then you're living life, and you're giving and you're taking. And it's way more complicated than that, but there's also something to it, I think.
To kind of springboard off of what you were saying about being with somebody, and I don't know, like, when you're photographing with someone that you spend a lot of time with, there's something about the camera that forces this kind of, like, for me, this kind of like hyper awareness and presence. Like, I feel so much more present with the person if the camera's there, even if it's not held up to my face, you know. I'm just so, something about that machine being close by with somebody that I really like, you know, it forces this kind of really intensive tuning in to happen, where it's just, there's a sensitivity that is really enabled by the process, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I like the tuning in, because it is like a sort of dial of, like, oh, we're here. Like, you're like very casual in your appearance, but inside everything is dialed into a certain sort of frequency. And then maybe after the camera's gone, you can like turn it back down to just like being lackadaisical or something.
Sure.
Yeah,
I feel like that's a kind of perfect example of something that I think both of you to again use this sort of, you know, tune into, but is what RaMell you called the kind of epic banal, and this idea of this, you know, intensity being in these kind of very small everyday moments. And, you know, Curran, your work particularly is so steeped in kind of being simultaneously macro and micro. And, you know, I think that both of you really have that in common in your work. And I'd love to hear more about how you kind of work in that ambivalent space between like epic and the everyday.
I think, well, to me, it's like the epic banal, like the language of the epic banal kind of, to me, is a direct result of like thinking of photography in the context of race and representation, and lack of representation, and who's been representing who, and what those representations look like, and cinema, and sort of all sort of visual media production, including painting, in that like these forms typically pedal in the sensational, right? Like, everyone loves to see the decisive moment. Everyone loves to see these sort of these intersections, or like this possible potential like explosion, or this consolidation, or something in the image, and that, you know, very quite often, at least in the history of representation of people of color, have directed a sort of whole swath of knowledge towards things that are just commonplace in everyone's life, but have been like over essentialized in people of color's life. And so the epic banal is like looking looking at moments that are just like so regular, like so quotidian, just like a person sitting, a person laying. But the way that it's captured allows for it to kind of take on a grander, sort of more exponential sense of, I don't know, electricity, some sort of electrifying. I mean,
in Hale County, the scene in the changing room is one of the most sort of electrifying everyday moments that I think about it so much, and I feel like that's a kind of, the way that whole scene plays out is just a kind of perfect example of kind of exactly what you're describing there.
Yeah, well, it's like, in that scene, that's a good example, because those are like guys, messing around, which happens in every locker room. Like you're pushing, you're doing all these different things. But if you're a critical person, a sort of judgmental person, you're injecting so much meaning into every single thing that's happening, right? Like, ooh, this person's violent, or this person's like this, or this person's sad. But maybe that's kind of not the truth. Maybe just because someone looks that way, or because you've encountered people that have been in similar positions that maybe held that moment in that way, you're assuming that that's the case. But in fact, these are just like such common moments with such regular people that take on so much more meaning if you allow it to in your own head. And sometimes it's true and sometimes it's not. And to allow yourself to sort of go through a full range of emotional connection over time with scenes that, fluctuate between the banal and the epic. I think it's such a powerful way to connect with someone through media. That's a good example. Thanks for mentioning it, Liv.
I think about that scene in the locker room as being like an everyday scene in which people are displaying tenderness that comes through affection. Like it seems to me like it's all about affection. Like physical touch, the joking around. It's more, to me, it's about tenderness and just love. But those are the moments that are so potent, but are sort of habitually unnoticed, I guess. Like it's the everyday stuff that kind of flies by our register without thinking about it. But when the camera can sort of zero in on it, it kind of overflows with potential meaning, I think. I don't know.
Yeah.
And it's also that thing, RaMell, that you mentioned earlier about coming to someone without their baggage and being the sort of most authentic version of yourself. That how often can you sit with a group of characters for that set amount of time without their baggage and without, and just kind of take the scene as it is. And I guess it's the same as what photography does, and all the kind of Curran, the characters in your, in some of the work that is so sort of full of characters, and they're so sort of complex. And like, you can sit in front of that for hours and still be kind of involved with the social dynamics between each person and the relationships that are going on.
It means a lot to hear. I mean, it's funny because part of maybe part of what I'm drawn to is you look for these kind of scenes where all these where you make these scenes with people where they're all this stuff is sort of colliding together and happening all at once, but there's no trying to describe it. There's no good story. It's just that kind of fluid daily nothingness, that looks poetic when photographed. Maybe it's not again, maybe it's like habitually something that's disregarded as a non-moment, but when it's photographed, it becomes something else or something. I don't know.
Well, I say when it's photographed well, Curran, when you photograph it. Well, I wrote this thing on William Christianberry once, and because he does this thing where and a lot of folks do it, but he he always came back to the same places and the same structures and the same landscape, and would rephotograph him and rephotograph him. And then if you look at his work for a while, I think that one starts to realize that he's not necessarily taking pictures of the thing. He's taking pictures of it's the place and the thing and its moment in time. And then if you look at all of them together, then you realize he's basically just making like a chart. He's just making a constellation of these stopping points, the stopping points of this paint, or the collision between the light, the structure of the grass, and 1998 right here. And then this one is this. And so I feel like a lot of that is happening in your images, in which there's like, when I think of like one of those EEG machines or one of those like things that do the heart, and they're just like going up and down, and you can look at it horizontally and you're like, oh my God, like look at the complexity of all these measurements. But if you were to turn the paper flat and look at it this way, all you would see is a sliver of the paper and you wouldn't see any other things. I think that one of your super talents is to like turn the world that's out there into a place where you can measure it. It's like a way of sort of measuring the way that people are with people and the way that the landscape is with the people. Because at any other angle, like you said, it's just kind of a mess. It's a non-moment. But you turn it into a measurement, which is really hard because, it's crazy out there. There's like a lot of shapes.
There's a lot of shapes, yeah. But the mess of it all is like part of the attraction. There's the mess of like shapes and bodies and architecture and color and all that stuff getting mixed up and jumbled it's a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
So why did you decide to make this series in Eureka specifically?
It's funny because I never would have guessed that would become a book prior. It's funny, even now I don't feel like I separate my work into different categories. Like maybe it's a show or a publication that kind of forces the hand to break things off into groups. But to me, it's all one project. The Eureka thing, like I was saying, it sort of developed out of the teaching job there, and it gave me this kind of unrestricted focus in one particular place for a pretty long interval of time. And I guess it all came out of that. I had the good fortune to meet Paul Sheik, who runs TBW, which is who published Lost Coast, and he saw some of the work and was encouraging. And so he was like, I think maybe there's a book here. And so it kind of developed out of that. Once I had that kind of spark of interest on his part, it kind of allowed me to kind of dig a little deeper and try to form something out of it, out of my time there. At the outset, when I first landed there and moved into the house I was living in, I didn't think like, this would be a good book or a good project or whatever. I was just excited about the community that I found myself in.
And it's interesting that both of you came to those places through teaching, and I wonder how that sort of affected your work on a kind of practical level. I know, RaMell, you said that a lot of the people in your photographs are your students, and so you have this kind of quite specific relationship to them. But I'd love to hear more about that.
Well, for me, it was. I also when I was there, when I first moved there, I coached basketball for a while. It like authentically, so I would have considered myself a photographer when I moved there, but I wouldn't have considered myself a filmmaker. I'd done like really small, like kind of fun music videos, but hadn't really, made anything, moving image wise that one I was proud of or one that anyone saw. And so I think what it did was it integrated me in the community in an authentic way for a project that I didn't know that I would eventually do. I would like wake students up when they were late, like drive to their house and like talk to their mother, like where's Shaquan? Like Shaquan should have been here 10 minutes ago. Like what's going on? Or if something, somebody was having like a celebration or somebody's sister was having a wedding, then I would go to the wedding. And so over 3 years that I was there before I made the film, I just ended up knowing everybody because the town's so small. There's only 2,500 people, and basketball season's the center of the town during that time. And I was working with kids who dropped out of school or who were kicked out or whatever. And the graduation rates are notoriously low in that part of the region. I think that year, 2009, their 40% graduation rate, right? Which is absolutely unbelievably absurd and poor. And like how is this a possible thing? Like this, not many people are graduating, like the system doesn't have many resources. And so almost like all those kids came through my program. And so with those relationships, when I decided to pick up a camera, also I'd say like no one would refer to me as a photographer or a filmmaker or an artist until we got nominated for an Oscar. People still thought that I was teaching at the local organization because that was my primary role in the town. And yeah, it just facilitated a genuine connection before the camera came in.
How was that shift once everyone realized that you were a filmmaker?
It's the worst. It's like, they're like, hey, when are we gonna make a movie? I'm like, it's so hard to make a movie. I'm not gonna just make a movie. Hey, my cousin, he's starting this. I'm like, oh, isn't that sweet?
Music videos.
Yeah.
I was curious, thinking about the movie, like you got to spend so much time with very particular individuals, and which meant that you saw them evolve and change and grow up and rise to the occasion, maybe not rise to the occasion, like go through all of the things. And I just found myself being envious of that ability to sort of take part in that and witness that kind of long period of time, and how it transforms people.
Yeah. No, that's I think one of the keenest observations of the process of the film that someone's made. No one has really articulated that so clearly, that they, like recognizing that what my life was basically their life growth and their life development. That was the most profound thing for me, aside from the finished product, aside from the moments that were captured, was just witnessing. And talk about gratitude. Like every day I would go home kind of like exhausted because I'd shoot for like 8 hours, but I'm like, I can't believe I saw that. Like no one gets to see that in someone's family. No one has time to, because you're living your own life. It was a really, really, really profound and kind of soul shaking to, I like to say, to like actually have another point of view, to like add another first person to your perspective. It's crazy.
I was going to ask Curran, that you ended a talk at the Whitney saying that even a great photograph is only ever a weak approximation of the vivid complexity and mystery of life, but is exactly this which most attracts me and informs my work. And I guess that quote sort of fits quite nicely onto what you were just saying, RaMell, about what is the impulse that kind of compels you to carry on photographing, if in the belief that it's only ever going to be a sort of approximation of life. And yeah, I would kind of love to hear kind of more about what compels you to continue making photographs, and if it is kind of similar to what RaMell's just describing about being witness to these kind of moments of growth and moments of connection.
Yeah, I mean, I would echo what RaMell said, in the sense that the real gift is the time spent, the things that you learn that you couldn't have expected, the emotional peaks and valleys that are very intense. The good, the bad, and the ugly, of spending time with somebody. Those are the things that make it all exciting and worthwhile and meaningful for me. Like the photograph is just this. I mean, I love the photograph. I love the final thing, but that's just a trace of something that you can never fully like describe a person or a place or a life or a relationship with a photograph. It's not possible. So the picture is just this kind of like beautiful leftover, this like small tiny fragment of this much bigger, more beautiful and sometimes scary, sometimes like startling like experience, but that I think that's what keeps me going, and keeps me trying, I guess.
So interesting, beautiful. I think both of you separately have kind of touched on this idea of tradition and what it means to be kind of working in a tradition, and I guess kind of RaMell, to begin with, how it was moving to Hale County within the kind of traditions of representations of the South, and not, kind of in broader visual culture, and also within photography and the kind of inheritance of people like Walker Evans photographing there. And I'd love to hear more about that. And then also, in terms of when we started this chat, you saying you feeling that Curran is the final of a kind of mode of kind of tradition and epic photographers. I just feel I'd kind of be interested to hear more about how both of you relate to kind of tradition and also being kind of contemporary, I suppose.
Yeah, it was really challenging for me when I first went to the South, when I first went to Hale County, because it's the literal place that Walker Evans and William Christenberry and James G wrote, but where they photographed. And I think I've mentioned this before. Like I photographed for 3 years before I made an image that people see, and I have those, and I use them in artist talks to kind of talk about like what I was doing that I eventually did not want to do, that I noticed in the images. I think it's tradition is a wonderful thing because it gives precedent. It's a mark. It's a point of contention, some place to bounce off of. But in terms of photographing folks in the South, I think that it's especially fraught simply because it's the most disenfranchised region in the U.S. and it's home of Black identity. It's cul-de-sac, and so I felt a special drive to make images that didn't participate in the previous camera logic, previous gaze logic as before. And obviously they do because they're after that. And so the idea is to sort of use the failures of before as, guiders for now. And yeah, I think it's quite easy, at least at this point in culture, to make images that are interesting and fresh of people of color, because that's not the tradition of photography. And so, my goal was to just sort of start from scratch, which was just make the simplest photographs possible, ones that acknowledge the camera as a reflection of the person who's making it, not this thing that produces a reality and a sense of logic that's necessarily already out there. It's one that's sort of curated and constructed by the maker. And then also be cognizant of the way in which images and the history of photography has presumed a sense of omniscience and sort of has assumed a sense of clarity and clarity in cahoots with social constructs is a problem, because the cultures, at least American culture, has a really problematic visual constitution. And so yeah, it's quite fun though, to be hyper aware. It's just, like what Curran said, when you have that camera, it raises the sensorial stakes. And when you're conscious of making images that are problematic, then it raises the intellectual stakes, and it becomes almost a game. It becomes this like competition with fantasy, with truth, with all of these things that are impossibly defined, but very, very, very familiar and sort of endemic in the way in which human beings, exist. Yeah.
Do you recall exactly in those first 3 years what about the images kind of weren't working for you before you broke the kind of barrier into making work that you were pleased with?
Yeah, I was making images that I thought people would like. I was like, oh yeah, this is a good photo, like this is this. Like I knew what it was, because I'd seen it before in a different way. And I think the first photograph that was sort of groundbreaking was the one that I took with I don't know if you remember, with the iPhone in front of the antebellum home. And yeah, to me, it was like, wait a second, like I'm a first person. Yeah, because I'm like, I've taken a picture of that same house multiple times with my large format camera, and every photo was just like a picture of the house. And I was like, but I see the house so differently. Like, that's not, like, why is this not the thing that I'm seeing? Because I'm like infusing it with all of this meaning that doesn't exist. It only exists in my head, Right. And so to be able to put my hand in was to be able to acknowledge that I'm the seer, like this is me. And then once I was in there, then all of my sort of fantasy, all of my relationship to it became, because the camera erases the maker, and it doesn't literally, but it does literally. Wait, I'm using literally so far. Yeah, like literally means actually these days. It like doesn't mean literally, but yeah.
And what about you, Curran, in terms of your relationship to a kind of tradition of American photography and, photography kind of on the road, or, what's your relationship?
I guess the challenge is to sort of, how do you learn from tradition? How do you take from it without being bound by it? How do you advance and move away from it in a way that's personal and create separation? And I don't know if I have that figured out, but it's a tricky question. It's something that I'm constantly battling with, because it's kind of like what RaMell was getting at. It's like, oh well, that's a good picture, but why do I think that's good? Like, because I've seen it before. Is that why I think it's good? So I guess it's trying to stay in dialogue with oneself, or with myself, about why I'm making the choices that I am, why I'm thinking about photography in the particular way that I am, and acknowledging when it is attached to a very specific type of tradition, like road photography or whatever, and trying to distance myself from that, trying to create, as much as it's possible, something that's divergent and new, from that sort of inner conversation.
And have you had a similar moment to that with the phone, that you kind of felt was kind of vanguard in some way, or that you felt was kind of breaking down a tradition that you were kind of battling against, I suppose?
I'd have to think about that. I will kind of echo what RaMell said, which is that sometimes I'll make a picture with an idea in my mind, or I'll think that it's supposed to be about this one thing, and then I'll look at the contact sheet months later and it's totally devoid of that me. like it has nothing to do with my ideas about it. You know, like the camera's almost like smarter than I am, you know, in a certain way. And so like there's all these pictures that I feel like I'm so excited to see on the contact sheet or made into a print or see as an image, because the experience I had was powerful, or because you know, the atmosphere of my like mental state or mood or like whatever it was that day, I thought that would be like translated into the image, and it never usually does. So I don't know, maybe that's kind of a roundabout way of comparing it, but I just feel like, yeah, the photo, it's never what you think it's going to be. And often the ones that I'm most excited to see, I'm most disappointed by.
Yeah. Ain't that the truth, Curran?
It's this funny thing, because like in the back of your mind, as you like keep at it year after year, you're kind of like, well, maybe the odds will be a little better, like the more I do this. And I find that it's like the opposite. It's like it's the same, you know. It's every frame is this abysmal failure until like one that kind of shows up every now and again. That's like, maybe there's something here. But it's photography is so much about failing. I feel like, I don't know.
Yeah. Well, it's like the skateboarder, you know. It's like you just
Right.
try to like ollie or kickflip 1,000 times, and then you landed once, and no one was even recording because you had failed so many times they didn't even think you were gonna get it.
Sure, it's the same thing. Yeah, it's like
yeah,
the whole process is a stumble for me anyway.
Yeah.
Well, maybe that's a good moment for us to draw this to a close. I feel like we've had so many moments in this conversation that we could have ended on a really uplifting note, and now we sort of we're sort of ending on a stumble here, which maybe is nice. Maybe it makes for a more sort of authentic close to what has been a really lovely conversation. So yeah, thank you so much, both of you, for taking the time to chat.
Thank you, Liv, for hosting us. And we kind of like gushed a little bit before, and I just want to say thanks again, especially to RaMell, whose work I'm a big fan of, and you know, thank you for being a part of this with me.
Thanks. Yeah, thank you, Liv, very much. It was quite fun and intimate, and yeah, I will also sincerely ricochet it back to Curran. I remember seeing your work a long time ago, seeing one image just on a hill, you know, these kids fighting, and it was like some kid was like stuck midair, and I was like, there's someone new on the block. It's like someone is the next one. But yeah, I'm a big fan as well, and look forward to just following your work. Yeah.
Same. This feeling's mutual.